share my screen with you all. Oh, it was working when we tried it earlier. Apologies.
I can try and share if needs be, Mark, if that's a problem.
Yes, sorry, Jack. Wait, let me try one more time. It got to the screen and then it, for some reason, didn't want to do it. I'll try one more time. Jack, for some reason, it's not letting me share now.
That's all right. If you want, I can share it and then just give us a shout between each slide, if that's okay.
Okay.
Can you see that okay?
Yeah, that's great.
Perfect.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Mark de St. Croix. I'm professor in the School of Sport and Exercise. My background is I trained as a PE teacher many years ago. I then stayed on at university after that to undertake a PhD focusing on the development of children's strength. And since then, my main sort of passions and interests are around talent identification, talent development, but with a particular focus on sort of enhancing performers who are on the elite talent pathway, but also looking at injury risk, injury prevention in youth sport, and more recently also around sort of coach education, so educating coaches and PE teachers in terms of sort of developing good sort of movement competency, which is what some of this works around. I'm absolutely delighted that we've got Rob Arman with us today to join us. Rob's bit will probably be the most interesting bit. So Rob is the lead strength and conditioning, lead for ECB. So we've worked with Rob for a number of years. And so what I'm going to do is present a little bit of the background stuff around sort of why physical preparation for cricketers is important. It might be perceived that we don't need to physically prepare for cricket, but we most definitely do. And then after that, sort of do a Q&A with Rob about his applied experience in the world of cricket for about, I think, the last 20 years or so. Rob's been working in cricket, and the type of stuff he does in preparing both cricketers at the grassroots level, but also right through to those cricketers that you see on Sky Sports out in all the exotic places. So for the T20 World Cup and the Ashes. Next slide then, please, Jack. Okay, I suppose one of the things just to mention, obviously preparing any athlete for any sport is really important. We know that. We know that I'm sure most of you participate in sport. You know that sort of some form of physical preparation is needed, both to enhance your performance, but also reduce the likelihood that you're going to get injured. We are in an interesting time where we've come through a sort of pandemic as well, where we may have been a little bit more sedentary than we have been otherwise. We have, more working at home. Lots of us been sitting more, doing meetings on computers, things like that. So sort of looking at injury risk, injury profiling from moving from a sedentary period to a more active period is really important. And one of the things that Rob probably will talk about is the challenges that he faced in preparing, elite cricketers for, the biggest tournaments in the world in their sport during a period where we had COVID restrictions in place. So quite a unique scenario that I'm sure hopefully we won't ever have again, where, we have periods where we don't have players in almost on a daily basis, where we're seeing them face to face. So some additional challenges there, and how we prepare those people back into those sort of environments of moving into that sort of daily preparation to be ready for their particular sports. The bottom one is one that we might want to talk about, is that cricket, of course, is demanding. I'm pretty sure that's Joe Root there having his calf stretched off because he suffered with cramp whilst out in India recently. So cricket is a demanding sport. Next slide, please, Jack. So yeah, the perception that we go out and we have our nice afternoon cream teas and we stand around in the field in the sunshine in the summer. You know, cricket is incredibly demanding, particularly, not exclusively, but particularly fast bowlers who, you know, have large forces going through the joints. Some great images here of probably two of our best fast bowlers of all time, James Anderson and Stuart Broad here. I mean, if you look at that very first image on the left-hand side, James is already in the air. He's running in at quite a fast speed. He's probably, I would say, there at least a good maybe 8-9 feet away from the bowling line. He's going to land very heavily on those joints from that position, and then he's going to repeat that for 6 balls, and then he's going to have a little bit of a rest, and he's going to repeat that again and again and again. So large stresses going through the joints. If you look at the picture of Stuart Broad there, that bowling action is probably one of the worst positions that we ever put the body in any sport. It's an incredibly poor position to be in from a mechanics perspective for an injury risk likelihood or perspective. We're not going to change that though, because it's exactly the position he needs to be in to bowl 80 to 90 miles an hour. So what we need to do, obviously, as practitioners, is make sure that if these guys are going to be delivering repeatedly these type of movements, how do we prepare their bodies so they can cope with these really heavy loads that are going through consistently over what might be, you know, a day, and in test matches over 5 days, especially if we spend long periods of time in the field. So cricket is definitely demanding sport. Next slide, Jack. However, the focus just isn't on fast bowlers, although lots of the sort of injury risk stuff is around fast bowlers. In terms of performance perspective, there's been a probably, and Rob might reiterate this when we get to the Q&A, particularly in terms of sort of fielding, and probably the white ball game in particular has made fielding a much more important component of the sport, probably in the last 10 to 15 years. But even when we're batting, we need to get the body into, you know, quite extreme positions at times. Looking at that sweep there, we've all probably done many lunges over time. It's a pretty good lunge position there. We've probably seen the physical exertion of batting for a long period of time. There's a picture there of Ben Stokes, a couple of heroic innings that he's done recently. You can see that almost the physical exhaustion that he's putting his body into just by batting. So this idea that cricket is a very sedate type activity that we don't really need to prepare people for is a bit of a misnomer. So something that we obviously definitely need to make sure that we prepare these guys appropriately for the demands of the sport. Next slide, Jack, please. Thank you. This is just a really quick one on this. This is why injury risk is important and why we develop stuff through the pathway. This is just an example of knee injuries, not necessarily from cricket, but in Norwegian children and adults. And you can see the number of cases of where we have like serious knee injuries. The example here is of how many cases occur from sort of young age, about 12, right through the sort of adult period. So serious injuries can occur, and they do also occur in cricket. We might think that most of the injuries in cricket are related to contact with maybe like the ball, but actually that's not the case. So next slide, please, Jack. Let's have a look at what the key injuries that we get to see. Oh, sorry, that was just my little transition to show that there's an increase through childhood. Here's a nice little recent study that looked at injury incidence rates, and you might be surprised that cricket is right at the very top of this list. So this was looking at the number of injuries out of a whole range of participants in school sport, and we were looking about an 78% injury rate for individuals participating in cricket. So the reason why I just highlight this one again is this we have this perception, I think, that things like football, basketball, hockey, those sort of very dynamic team-based contact sports are where we see most of the injuries, but actually we do see lots of injuries in and through cricket. And just to give you a little bit more of an idea of how that might look in a more detailed perspective. So next slide, please, Jack. So this is a 5-year study of youth cricketers here, and we can clearly see that the sort of percentage injury rates here. So number of players in each of these age group, and then we've got number of percentage of injuries across all of these age groups. About 73% of injuries will occur based on these players. So like in the under 15s, as an example, we got 712 players, and over the 5 years there were 505 injuries. So 71%. So that's quite large. We've got a sport where injury is likely to occur if you're participating in this sport. So making sure we reduce that likelihood is really important, and that's where sort of Rob's job particularly comes in. We know that teams are more successful if they have players available. So one of Rob's key roles is getting players available and making sure therefore they stay available for series, so that they can cope with the demands, particularly when you get into things like World Cup tournaments, Ashes tournaments, where you have a series in a cricket. You have quite a large number of games in a short period of time, so we don't have long rest and recovery periods. We have to make sure bowlers, batters, fielders are ready for the heavy demands and the short rest periods between particular games. Next slide, please, Jack. And the final sort of one on this is sort of a bit more of a detailed breakdown, because you might think, well, actually, surely most of the injuries are probably when batters get hit with the ball, fast bowling, that sort of thing is where we predominantly. So we've got contacts. There's not a lot we can do about it. But actually, if you look at this, the large percentage of injuries occur in what we refer to as non-contact scenarios. So, when someone's running up to bowl, over bowling and bowling, not surprisingly, we get lots of injuries through that type of activity. But we also have some injuries through batting, running between the wickets. Interestingly, quite a lot of injuries through the warm-up. And you'll have probably all seen things in the press previously about England players loving a bit of their football before they go out to play, and the risk of getting injured in warm-up sometimes. So there's a whole range of non-contact scenarios where players can get injured. And the reason why that's important is that what we know is if there's no contact, then we can do something to prevent the injury. So it's something to do with conditioning of the players, okay, rather than them being accidentally hit by the ball, running into a hoarding, potentially anything like that, that sort of is a contact. If it's non-contact, that's got to be to do with the conditioning in some respect of the player. Okay, so next slide, please, Jack. So it's really important that we get the kids to move well. So the main work that we've been doing with Rob is around making sure that lower down in the cricket pathway, kids have fun when they're playing cricket. That's really important. But it's important that they can do the fundamental movements well, so that if they are on the elite pathway, if they're moving through, and Rob will see them through the England pathways, that invariably it's the kids that move well who probably are successful, okay, from a performance perspective, but also from a reduction in injury perspective as well. Okay, next slide, please, Jack. So what we're trying to do, or what the main role of the work that we do, is about making sure that we build, in simple terms, a healthy, strong, resilient young athlete. And we might talk sometimes about building like the athlete maybe first before the cricketer or the footballer, because this rolls into any context, that actually building this really resilient, strong athlete is as important as a lot of the technical stuff. And if you work in some elite environments, often we put a lot of emphasis on technical work and maybe not sometimes enough stuff on the more work in terms of conditioning and the demands of building the athlete. Okay, next slide, please, Jack. So we develop the good habits, and the reason why this is important is that we know that developing habits is better than trying to change bad habits. Once people have got bad habits, it's difficult to get them to change. So Rob wants to see players coming through that can move well so that he doesn't have to deconstruct their movement because they've picked up really bad, poor habits, which means getting the kids at a young age and developing those movement competencies are really important. Okay, next slide, please, Jack. So we always talk about moving first and loading later. So, you know, we get the good movement, the movement competency that allows Rob and his wider team of strength and conditioning, physical performance coaches to be able to go, these guys move well. We can start loading them up. And we know that loading, therefore, can help develop that strength and power that we know that they're going to need to be robust and resilient for playing a 5-day test match series, for example. Okay, next slide, Jack, please. So knowing the key movements in cricket, we make sure that we incorporate all of these into our training. So we know we're going to run in straight lines, but we also know that if we're fielding, we're going to change direction. We're going to have to sprint. We're going to have to dive occasionally. We're going to have to turn. We're going to be squatting if we're in the slips. So all of these particular movements are important. You've seen, you know, if we're sweeping, we're in a good lunge position. So all of these type of movements we know are important. So we put these into the development program. Next slide, please, Jack. Okay, so we're always looking for good movement. We're looking, can the children get into the positions? Can they control their body really well? You know, how do they run? What do they look like when they're doing these movements? Next slide, please, Jack. So we know that these type of things work. Okay, so injury prevention programs work. They work in cricket, which is why we sort of developed with Rob some coach education programs to make sure we were educating the coaches so that they could deliver appropriate movement competency type work so that the kids could perform better, have more fun, obviously want to stay engaged in cricket, but also reduce their likelihood of injury. So these sort of programs definitely work. We know they work from the research that has been done by a whole range of people. Next slide, please, Jack. So we develop all of these things, all these athletic movement skill competencies that you see here. I mean, the key thing here, if you just click next slide, please, Jack, is actually lots of this is actually just done by enhancing balance and coordination and movement more broadly. Okay, next slide, please, Jack. So sort of to finish off, we know that we need to develop good movement early on in the pathway. We know that people that don't move well as youngsters don't move well as adults. So you have to deconstruct their movement, which is problematic, especially if they're on an elite pathway. So the fundamentals need to be established at a really young age. Okay, next slide, please, Jack. So these are the type of things that we've done so far with the ECB. We've done a little bit of screening work with the fast bowlers. We've been linking the poor movement to injury risk and incidents, but more recently developing this coach and delivering and evaluating this coach education program with the England cricket guys. And they're now starting to embed some of this movement competency stuff into their level 2 coaching awards so that all coaches coming through the coaching pathway understand why this is important for their players. Next slide, please, Jack. So key role for the coach, keep it fun, but make sure that you can use your critical coach's eye to look at good movement. And next slide, I think this might be about the last one, hopefully. Here's just some of the resources that we've developed in terms of the good movement. Next slide, Jack. Just whizzing through these. And these are the type of things that we've done with the group. So we try and embed and make sure that students are involved in all of our research projects. So whenever we go up and do any testing, if we go up to the National Centre, which is at Loughborough, you know, we're taking students, they help us collect the data, so they're involved in the projects. So this isn't just work that we as staff do, it's work that we make sure that the students are involved with, whether they're sort of first year students or masters or PhD students, we try and get them involved. Last slide, I think, Jack. Take home messages. Cricket is demanding. We need to build athletes as well as cricketers. So this sort of stuff is as important as the technical stuff. We need to keep it fun, because if we keep it fun, they'll stay engaged. We need to move first, load second, and we need to educate coaches about movement competency. Very much a whistle-stop tour. I appreciate that was quite quick. I'm trying to sort of keep to time to give really Rob enough time to talk about his stuff. So Rob, obviously, I know we've been working together for quite a while.
Yeah.
So I know what you do, but I just wonder if you could sort of just briefly tell those listening sort of what your main sort of responsibilities are. And I suppose you'll drift into my second question with this is, what do you think the key attributes are that make a good cricketer?
Yeah. My main role is to lead and oversee the S&C delivery, if you like, to mainly to the England men. And the primary role of that is, as you mentioned, is to improve their overall fitness levels, because we know cricket is demanding. But at the same time, it's to improve their availability. There's no good having your best players sat on the bench. So we've got a few injured players at the minute. Injuries happen as part of the game. That we can't get away from that. But big part of my role is to actually try and reduce the likelihood of these injuries happening just by improving players' fitness. So as well as kind of the detailed work with the England men, then I've also got responsibility for the pathway. So the cricketers coming through, so those guys coming through under 19s and Lions program. And then at the same time, I also kind of quality assure S&C delivery across the whole county. So the role is kind of really wide ranging, but essentially it all funnels down to one thing, and that's making sure the England men are the fittest team in the world. And alongside that work, then I've also got a kind of a smaller role where I do engage with people like yourself and look at different research projects about how we can actually improve the services that we deliver. So if that's improving coach education, or if that's looking at lumbar stress fractures, which are a massive kind of massive cause of time loss for us, then I'm kind of involved in those programs again. It all filters towards improving the fitness levels of the England men cricketers.
Yeah, so it's a wide ranging remit,
yeah.
As I know. I think my question is, I know we had a chat many years ago, and I know you've been involved in cricket for a long time. You've seen a little bit of this transition, particularly with this increase in the white ball game, the T20. We have the 100 now. And I think I remember one of our first discussions, you talked about the fielding of, was it the Sri Lankans? It might be in the Sri Lankans, so who rose quite quickly in sort of white ball cricket, mainly based on their fielding, which wasn't seen as an important part of the game in the traditional 5-day test match sort of scenario. And if anyone's watched T20 cricket live, there are some incredibly athletic catches on boundaries where we're tapping them to other people's. So do you think that change in white ball cricket has changed how we view cricket as a very athletic type?
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, if you just look at the even if you just look at the differences in just the game itself, Test cricket to T20 cricket, the two games that, yes, they're still played with a bat and a ball and 11 men each side, but the more time you spend looking at the game and kind of almost dissecting it, the more you start realizing that they're almost very, very different games. You definitely need to be athletic to play both sides of things, but the surge, if you like, in the volume of T20 cricket or kind of white ball cricket, so the 150 over T20 cricket has really sped up the demands of the game. And as you said, I've been around in cricket a long time now, and the game is considerably quicker than what it was 5, 6, 7 years ago. That also means that in the next 5, 6, 7 years, the game's going to get quicker again. So all players need to be, yes, they have to have a huge aerobic system to cope with the demands of the game, because they don't just play a game on a Saturday, then have a week off and play a game the following Saturday. If you're playing T20 cricket, you tend to play 3, maybe 4 fixtures in a week. It doesn't sound much, but if you think, all the players wear GPS units now, and we know they cover anywhere between 6 and 8 Ks in a T20 game, which, okay, it doesn't really sound that much, but a considerable portion of that is done at really high speed. So they're running faster than 20 kilometers an hour. And not only that, when you dig into the data a little bit, and you start to see that some of the players are completing 70 or 80 sprints, and that's just in the fielding innings. So if you start thinking about they have to complete 70 or 80 sprints in 80 or 90 minutes, then the demands of the game kind of start stacking up, and you start thinking, wow, there's the demands of T20 cricket are actually considerably more than probably what you think. So a massive portion of my work, especially over the last few years, has been analysing that GPS data and going, right, what can I work out from this, and how can I take that information to improve what I do with the players to make sure that they are ready to go off to things like the T20 World Cup or to go off and play franchise cricket and be able to perform at the speed of the game, which we know that where the game is.
And based on that, almost leads nicely to the next question, which is about the speed of the game and the sort of demand, particularly for fast bowlers to bowl faster and faster and faster. And we know sort of the mechanics of bowling, which I tried to stress at the start, isn't particularly good for the stress that's placed on the body, you know, based on biomechanics studies of, you know, low joint loading and things like that. So how, I mean, obviously your role is going to get more demanding in terms of preparing these guys to be able to cope with the load. So what sort of stuff do you do with your fast bowlers in particular in terms of making them ready for bowling, you know, but also making sure it's not too much that they get broken?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it's probably a combination of art and science, to be honest, to getting this right, because not every fast bowler is the same. So the recipe that you use to kind of put together a program for a fast bowler is very different. I mean, as you said, there's no getting away from it. Fast bowling it's a pretty stupid sport, to be honest. You run in at 20 kilometers an hour, and then you come to a complete stop, and then you bowl a ball as hard as you can at 80, 90 miles an hour. And you don't just do that once. You know, the closest thing to it is like javelin throwing. The two movements are very similar. Javelin throwers only throw 6 times, and that's it. They're done then. Then they'll have another competition a couple of months later. In cricket, they may do that, you know, maybe 150 times a day, which is it's crazy. So trying to prepare a player for that is really huge. And as you alluded to, the ground reaction forces that these guys experience are anywhere from 7 to 10 times body weight. So as they come in from that running and then they stop and then they transfer momentum, there's a huge amount of force going through them. So, you know, working backwards from there, and that's always the way I like to work, is that they need to be strong lower body wise. There's no two ways about that. You can't get away from it. They need to have good lower limb musculature to be able to cope with the demands of the forces that they're going through. And at the same time, they also need to be fit enough to keep running in at 20. If you think about running on a treadmill, most treadmills in gyms only go up to 20 k's an hour. And these guys are running in faster than that all the time. So it's when you put those two things together, there's a lot of things that you have to work out. But in terms of kind of trying to make them robust enough, if you like, for the demands, like I said, I always work from that. I always work backwards from the competition. You know when the competition is coming up, and you'll probably have a rough idea of how many overs that they're likely to bowl, and then it's just a matter of, right, in 2 months' time, I need them to be able to bowl 40 overs, and it's just a matter of working backwards from there, and just sequencing the training so that when they actually come to play the game, it's not actually a shock to them. They've actually accumulated enough training volume over a long period of time so that they're ready to. And we've got a saying, it's not just ready to play, but it's actually ready to perform, and there's quite a big difference there. I think previously people get caught up with being ready to play. It's like, okay, I've done everything, and they increase their training up to a certain point. Then the game is actually quite a big demand for them. It's quite a big jump. But we've taken it that step further, and it's that transition between ready to play to ready to perform. So, and that's how we go about kind of structuring our training. We work backwards and think, right, what do they need to be able to perform at this point in time?
Yeah, that's a really nice summary, and yeah, I like the bit at the start. It's a little bit of science and
Yeah.
and guesswork as well. There's often no magic wands in this stuff, is it? Otherwise, we'd probably all be very rich people and going around with a magic ingredient. I think it's those guys listening. It's sometimes it's incredibly difficult to sort this out. I probably would use the word ready to compete personally, but that's okay. No. So I know you've been involved more heavily sort of in the white ball game. So the one day is the T20s. Obviously, we had a T20 World Cup that was disrupted by COVID. It must have been incredibly difficult to prepare the players for that and a subsequent Ashes series. So what were the main things that the main challenges that you had during COVID in trying to get players ready for the demands of, the top sport in competition for these guys?
It was, it was really, really challenging. I mean, we were in Sri Lanka at the time. Then next thing you know, we were flown home without, pretty much overnight. And then we're told that cricket will come on again. We have to have cricket on. And that was, what the government wanted as well. But at the same time, we weren't allowed to go anywhere. And none of the players had access to gyms. So it was like, right, how do we actually go about this? So to be truthful, we actually just took training back a notch. And instead of being that one-to-one, training and working with the players, we put a lot of onus on the players to, all the players were set up with programs, but then they were using their hour a day that they were allowed outside to go out for a run, or they're doing their bodyweight training at home. And a lot of the work was done online, to be honest. It was, turn FaceTime on, FaceTime a player, right, this is the session we're going through today, and actually work virtually and interact online, and that was that was the only way around it, to be honest. So it was really, really challenging. I mean, it wasn't just the fact we weren't allowed to see each other as well, but then there's also restrictions on when you kind of go away and you travel, that there's restrictions on how you kind of go about moving around the hotel and everything else. So the last couple of years have been a huge kind of logistical challenge, but I mean, times like this, you just have to make do with what you got, to be honest. And the demands of the game don't change regardless of what the constraints you put under. So you've just got to find a way to work around it. And if that means that, they may not get intensity because they haven't got weights at home, so how else can you create intensity with the programs that they're doing? So is it introducing more plyometrics into the program? Is it then introducing more sprints outside? So it's, there are lots of different ways and conversations that we had around just manipulating their normal gym programs, which everybody's very used to right, how do we do this with an 8-kilo dumbbell?
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? I think we all had challenges, didn't we, during that period of time? So it's just two last quick ones to finish off with. So, I mean, there was often a traditional sort of historical perspective that, cricket's a summer sport. We know now it's an all-round year thing for these guys now. That the loads are massive given the franchise, the IPL, the 100, the T20s. How do you go about sort of programming? Like, what do you program what a year looks like for a player based on what competitions they're involved with? How do you do the overall yearly load now? It's not just a few summer.
Yeah, it is becoming more challenging purely because there's more and more competitions springing up, and then obviously it's in the players' best interest to go off and earn some money as well, so they want to go off and play more cricket. So it basically comes down to a conversation at the start of the year with a player where you've got a rough idea when the competitions happen, especially the franchise competitions, and say, which ones do you want to play? And then it's a matter of then identifying, right, these are your playing periods. Where do we get your period for rest and recuperation? Where do we get your training blocks in? And it comes down to a structure that's as simple as that, really. It's identify playing program first, then building the rest and the training periods around that.
Yeah, sure. It's definitely a year-round thing. And just the last one, because I know there's a few questions popped up and I want to try and get to those, is so obviously we've been working a little bit on this sort of coach education program, and we've delivered it a few times now. Can you just summarize why for you it's important that that the good movement patterns are established at a young age, and why the program that we've worked on a bit together is sort of quite important for developing world-class cricketers, but also kids that just want to have fun in cricket?
Yeah. I'll probably start with a story, to be honest. And this was the event, if you like, that really cemented this in my mind. I turned up to an academy training session somewhere, and it was for a county. But I met an 18-year-old lad who couldn't run backwards. Because all of his life he'd spent playing. He was either a goalkeeper in playing football, so he was used to moving sideways, or he's a fast bowler in cricket, so he's used to running forwards. And every time he ran backwards, he fell over. And I was just absolutely gobsmacked that then the coaches were also saying that this lad will go on and have a professional contract afterwards. And I was like, how can he have a professional contract where he can't even actually move in 360 degrees? If you ask him to run backwards, he falls over. You have to be able to manipulate your body in space and just have some real simple fundamental movement skills. And I didn't really see this. And that was the part that really hit home to me, that cricket isn't just about the technical skills. The fundamental movement skills are hugely important to the game. Hopefully I've put this across that, and you have as well, that the game is hugely athletic. We can't get away from that. There's running between the wickets, there's run up to bowl, there's also the fielding that takes place. That players have to be athletic to play at any level of cricket. And the program that you've put in place, and we've worked on to put in place, has been huge for me. Because for me, cricket's always been viewed as a very technical sport, and as the physical side of things has always kind of lagged behind a little bit. And it's always been my passion to make sure that the physical side of things actually sit alongside the technical skills. If you look at any sport, there's kind of normally 4 key areas that you look at. There's the technical and tactical, psychological, physical. They're the kind of main areas that you look at. And for me, physical was always lacking within cricket, so it's always a case of bringing this up. And not only that, if I'm kind of the head of England cricket or head of England's S&C, I don't want to be doing remedial work with a player when they come on their first senior tour. I don't want to be teaching them how to run backwards or teaching them how to squat properly, or because they've got really bad movement patterns. I want players that are coming in and ready to be able to go off and perform and compete, as you said, that they're not, all I'm doing is tinkering with and just kind of really refining their top end qualities. I don't really want to be doing the basic work for them. So, and my whole idea around this was kids need to learn at an early age what fundamental movement skills look like. And unfortunately, there's not enough S&C coaches to go around where every child can have access to an S&C coach. But coaches the skills coaches are in the business of teaching movement. They teach how to bat, they teach how to bowl. And I feel it's massively important to try and empower coaches to help teach basic athletic skills. And just ultimately, we want to optimize talent development. And I think we can do that just through simple movement education. And I think that the program you've put together about how to improve children's physical literacy is really, really impactful. And I don't, we will start to see the fruits of that program in the next couple of years.
Yeah, well, I fully agree with all of that. So that's really great. Got a few minutes just maybe to answer some of these questions. So what's one here? So what do you think the main strength exercises that you do for cricketers are? And I suppose the other one is a little bit around a recovery strategy. So do you use ice baths? What sort of post nutrition type stuff do guys tend to use? Yeah.
Anything lower body wise is really, really important for strength for cricketers. I wouldn't say that there's one key exercise, because it's not. And as I said in the beginning, every cricketer is very different, and they'll have a slightly different bowling style, which means they'll have their own way of training, and there'll be certain exercises that suit them. But anything that's looking to develop the strength of the quadriceps, your hamstrings, your glutes, your calves, and your trunk is going to set you up to go in a long way to moving forward. So if any kind of squat pattern, any kind of deadlift pattern, any kind of single leg lunge or step up pattern is really, really going to help improve your lower body strength. In terms of ice baths, some players like them, some players don't. Some players really, really hate them. And I've gone through stages in my career, definitely, of forcing everybody into an ice bath, and I've got into some really tricky situations where players clearly do not want to go in. So now for me, ice baths are pretty much optional, but there are definite benefits to them, especially when you play, like you said, when you're in a competition period where games come thick and fast. Sometimes we won't actually put the players in up to their neck. We'll just kind of ice their feet, because their left leg takes a lot of impact. So for me, it's right, can we reduce the swelling in just that one area, because we know that's where they might kind of start to get just some low level inflammation. So it's we've moved from the old everybody into the ice bath for 10 minutes to right, let's make this an individual process and who needs what. And that's gone down a lot better than forcing everybody into into a bucket full of freezing cold water.
Yes, having been around elite athletes, there is a mixed bag about whether you can get them in the ice bath or not. One last quick question then. It's just a question of how sort of you got into your career.
Yeah, it's a good question, really. I kind of almost fell into it. I was similar to you, Mark. I went to university and I was about to engage in my PGC to become a PE teacher, but I saw an opportunity back in my hometown in Cardiff to work in the sports science lab, testing athletes. So for me, it was like too good an opportunity to turn down. I was kind of going back home. I was kind of working with athletes, and my mind was always more about kind of working with athletes and coaching rather than the kind of teaching side. So it was a fantastic opportunity. It took me into there. And then the work just carried on from there, to be honest. I started work with the university cricket team where they wanted fitness test us and fitness test us again. And they still wanted me to write them fitness programs, and things just snowballed from there. And before you know it, I was kind of working with kind of Glamorgan Academy, then Glamorgan Seniors. Then I started working with England on a kind of consultant basis. And then I carried on, and here I am sat as the lead S&C for England cricket. So yeah, it's been a long career. I've been in cricket almost over 20 years now. But it's been a stepping stone each and every time to get here.
Yeah, great, really nice journey there as well through that. I'm conscious, Jack, that we're sort of on time. I know there's a couple of other sort of slightly more biomechanical technical questions in there about bowling speed and what are the key things that a bowler needs for speed. I'll
answer that one if you like. The bowling speed is really simple. It is fast bowling is all about biomechanics. It's about transferring momentum from linear momentum to angular momentum. So the speed of run up is really, really important. And that doesn't mean you run in as fast as you can, because you won't be able to control the kind of the back foot and front foot contact. So if you run up at a speed that's probably around anywhere from 20 to 25 k's an hour, depending on how strong you are, that'll help you transfer the momentum from linear momentum to angular momentum. And it's that transfer momentum where the ball speed comes from. So as well as the gym stuff, you're talking about what the main strength exercises for cricketers, you also need to be very, very good runners. You need to have a really, really good technical running style, because you have to run a lot within the game of cricket. There's no two ways about it, and you have to run fast as well. So it's, for me, don't just kind of concentrate on one area. It's definitely speed and running skills are the key to pushing on.
Brilliant. Thanks, Robert. It's been great to have you along today. I know you're very busy, so to have your insights of the real world stuff, what happens on the ground, has been great. So thanks so much for coming in today.
No problems. Thank you.
Coming online, you know what I mean.
Yeah. Thank you both. Yeah, and to pass on those thanks again, Rob. Really good insight there to the actual current work and environment in the ECB. So that's great to have on this talk. Really privileged today, and some really good questions are actually coming in. That was really helpful. We are here for like another minute or two, so any questions from these guys, please do ask them. Other than that, you are free to leave. Thank you very much for joining the call today. But a last thank you to Mark for the part you shared at the start. That's really, really insightful. And the following, Rob, again, that was really great from you as well. Thank you very much. We'll stick around for a minute or two, but any questions from the guys remaining, please do just chuck them in the chat, and we'll stay here until you guys leave. Thank you.
I don't know if the people stayed on, but Rob, there was one other one in the chat, which was about cricketers getting into unorthodox actions, probably bowling and batting positions, other sports. This hasn't been coached out of them, so is it more of a risk management?
Oh yeah, I can see the question here. For me, it's every individual has got their own individual way of batting and bowling. So, and if they have got an unorthodox action, that's probably just because of the way they're set up from a muscular perspective and a biomechanical perspective. If you think it seriously puts them at risk of injury, then that might be something to work on, to change with a technical bowling coach. But you shouldn't really kind of coach everybody to have an orthodox action. I don't think that's the right approach, to be honest.
If you guys left and have any other questions, please do ask. Both the guys are currently still here. If not, you're free to leave. Thank you very much for your time.